Hi guys, welcome to the first episode of T&M Financial Chronicles. This is hosted by myself, Moses, and co-founder Theo.
So we are two students who have written articles on various topics such as after-hours trading, psychology of M&A negotiations, and today we're diving into the world of people-focused M&A, and our pleasure to be joined with David Blois.
Yes, David Blois is the director and co-founder of M&A Advisory, a firm based in London which specializes in advising marketing and communications businesses on a strategic exit while being sector-specific and size and geography agnostic.
So David, now the floor is yours to tell more about yourself and your firm and how it operates.
Great stuff. Yes, I founded M&A Advisory about 15 years ago. We're focused on the marketing communications sector, people businesses essentially. We look after digital agencies, advertising agencies, PR agencies, and the like. We're, as I say, sector specific, but size and geography agnostic. So we work all over the world for different sizes of business. Most of our clients are sellers of businesses as opposed to buyers because we can add the most value to sellers. Sellers only sell their business once, buyers buy many businesses. So our true value is for the sellers. Being we're the recommended firm, I should say, for people like the PRCA, the Design Business Association, the DMA, and the International Consultants Organization, ICU. We have a big ensuring in the people business, and you could argue that all businesses are people businesses, therefore this could apply to all, but I don't know whether it does, and I don't know whether other M&A firms think about this, but we say there's got to be three elements in every deal, and that is chemistry between the parties when they first meet, and then there's got to be a cultural fit, which is a style of working, really. It's a business culture. So you wouldn't, for example, put a bureaucratic business together with a entrepreneurial business. They would just clash.
Yeah.
And finally, there's got to be an outstanding business proposition. So, you know, these businesses don't sell like a piece of property where, you know, one day the buyer walks in with his checkbook and then the founder is gone. There needs to be a handover. There's client relationships and things like that to hand over. So these things are normally done over a period of time. So what you want is the third element is what's called an outstanding business proposition. So that there's in other words, a reason for doing the deal. So that could be things like access to US market, or, you know, a US company wanting to access Europe and they buy into the UK, all of these things that will drive any incentive payments with the deal. So the main thing we have before we even get offers for the business is we go through that process, chemistry meeting, a proposition meeting to ensure those three elements are there. And then we call in various offers from the buyers to see who's the best buyer. Generally, the buyer with the best proposition will be able to pay the best price.
Brilliant stuff, really insightful.
Yeah.
So you mentioned before in your career, you moved from corporate finance in quite big firms to a more people-focused M&A space.
Yeah.
Just for your mindset and philosophy, what changed from moving to big corporate finance to a more people-focused space? What changed in your mindset?
Changed in my life. Right, sure. I mean, look, I started off I trained as an accountant with a firm called Reed International, who changed to Reed Elsevier and then are now the RLX Group. And at the time, and I had some wonderful experience. I worked all over the world, Africa. After qualifying, I worked in Germany, America. It was a fantastic experience, and I finished up in corporate finance in doing quite big deals. I was there for about 4 years. They had a philosophy at the time of what was called shareholder value. In other words, they did everything that was the idea of this, and it's probably a bit old-fashioned concept now, but it was they do everything in the interests of shareholders only, and therefore other stakeholders really didn't get a look in. It was their focus was on shareholder value more than anything else. And as an employee, I thought, actually, this is not going to do me any good. So I wanted to find someone that valued people. And my view at the time, I thought, well, how about finding a people business? So I left Reed and I wrote to the finance director of Saatchi and Saatchi at the time.
Wow.
And looked for a an opportunity with them. And it was just a bit of luck, really. She asked me what I knew about Saatchi, and I told her about the book I'd read on Saatchi's, and I also happened to read, why it was in there, I don't know, but it was in the Financial Times that day that their business in Hungary, Budapest, Hungary, had won the Master Foods account. So I said, I've read today that your business in Hungary has read the Master Foods account. And at that moment, her eyes nearly popped out of her head, because she said to me, what do you know about Hungary? Because Hungary was the job she was really interviewing me for that I didn't know, because that was their major problem area at the time, because there are a number of upside down commercial issues with that business and it needed fixing. So I ended up as finance director of Saatchi and Saatchi in Hungary. I went out.
Wasn't the war going on at that time?
No, the wall had come down in about 89, and this was late 92.
Oh.
So what happened is that the Kosovan War was, you're right, in terms of the Kosovan war was going on in Kosovo with the former Yugoslavia. It was quite a big war, and that was very close to Hungary. And in fact, in many ways, you could get the train from Vienna, and that would be a train that would go back through Budapest, and it would be like a war train. It was a bit scary, all blacked out and everything.
Yeah.
But the wall had come down, so people had rushed into these. Saatchi had rushed into these East European markets. Hungary was only a small market, but it was kind of the most Western. Yeah. And so they went in there quite quickly, but there were a lot of issues which made it very difficult to make money in those markets.
Do you think agencies suffered in terms of growth and efficiency?
In terms of when? In Hungary, or?
Yeah, during the time that you were director.
Well, it was a tough time to go in. I think the reason for that, there were several reasons why, because normally in the West at the time, they had contracts with big advertisers that used to work on about 15% of their spend, but actually they'd been negotiated down to 10% or less of the spend. And but in Hungary, the media prices were about a fifth of Western levels. So these contracts were transferred there, and therefore you were getting less than 10% of a fifth, which wasn't a lot of money, a lot of revenue for all the effort. And the standards needed to be kept up because you're an international organization, and the cost of people at the time was very, very expensive. They'd come out of a socialist environment where it cost an awful lot of money to employ people. In fact, there was about the national insurance was about 50% of the person's salary.
Wow,
it was huge. So the employment costs over compared to what the employee took home was massive. They took probably in the end 20% after taxes, and you'd paid the national insurance contribution. So that was the thing. And the other thing is there were no skilled people in advertising because they'd never had advertising agencies. So you had to import very expensive in hard currency expat people. That helped with the training and ran the clients. So all of those things put together made it a very, very tough market. And the other thing was there was a big overhang of Hungarian laws, which you'd get big fines for if you broke, which meant that it was difficult to have like Western accounting systems and all of those sorts of things. So it was a really challenging job. Plus the fact Hungarian was about the third most difficult language in the world to speak, and I'm not good at languages at the best of times.
Yeah, me neither.
So we're all finance people, you see, so we're always crap at languages.
Stick with English, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. But no one spoke it. Well, a few people spoke it out there, and that was the secret of starting it rolling. You had to find a few English speakers and also teach your people English. They were very smart people, the Hungarians. They did pick up things very quickly. That was a great thing about them.
Yeah.
So over the years, I'm sure you've seen a lot of firms come that ready to be sold by themselves. And so obviously a firm can have good financials, but there could be certain things in the management style or the culture that's a red flag. So what's some things you see that, even if the financials are solid, this firm not leave the market?
Yeah. What's really important, what you want to try and do is ensure that any business, buyers will look for a business that's sustainable, and sustainable not in the green sense, but sustainable in the ongoing sense of the word. And so what you need to have in place, if it's to tick those boxes, you have to have things like, if you're a founder who's got a business that he wants to sell in a few years, he's got to establish a good second tier management team, ideally. So that means that, the buyer will expect one day the founder will leave, and therefore they rely on the second tier. So that's a really important thing to have in place. The second thing, you really need to have a good business proposition, which is really clear and specialized. You don't want to be a jack of all trades and master of none. You want to be very specialist, because that will attract the buyer, because you get a buyer, buyers like to have something that's really specific that they will add on to their business. Yeah. The other thing is, you mentioned, Theo, good systems, financial systems and procedures. That's really essential. There's nothing worse than having buyer meetings and the buyer says, can I see your latest forecast? Yeah. And then all of a sudden 3 months go by while the guys are trying to pull it together. You need to have proper management accounts and things like that. What else? You need to have good margins. I'd say for an agency, you need to be making about 20%. You don't want to rely too much on your clients, so you don't want one single client to be much more than 30% of revenue. All of these things are really important. The other thing is, you need to turn it into a kind of machine. So you want to make sure you've got a good marketing funnel. And funnily enough, that's something that marketing agencies aren't great at. And so it's really important that they develop that, especially in this day and age with algorithms, online. A lot of people will choose their agency online, and they want to make sure that that's got, that comes to the top of the pack when they say, I want an agency that's going to help me grow in France or something like that. Whatever you want that, you want to become top of the pack if that's what you do. So those things are really important.
Brilliant.
So we encourage founders to work on the business rather than in the business. They've got to make themselves redundant, as it were.
Yeah. So what do you think about the idea of a multiple exit? So a seller sells a large chunk of their business, but they still keep a large chunk. So 49% to the seller. And
I think that's a really, really good way of selling a business. I actually quite favourable of it. Yeah. And there's different ways. Sometimes you get a founder that's right up close to retirement, and he's got a good second tier management team, and all he wants to do is retire and go fishing or something like that. He doesn't want to stay on, and so we manage deals like that. But also sometimes you have a business with a younger founder that wants to, as I say, as my little catchphrase up here says, play on a bigger stage. Yeah. And what happens there is that you might well sell. So that for example, that founder might say, look, I've got great opportunities here, but the US there's a much bigger opportunity in the US. I want a US office, but I can't afford that. I can't afford the investment. I can't afford the risk. So what that might happen is he might get bought by a US firm, for example, and the US firm might buy 60% of his business and he keeps 40. And that way they'll grow together. He'll use the resources of the US firm. He'll be a subsidiary, and he'll grow at a much faster rate than he would have done on his own. And then at some point in time, either an agreed point of time or on an event, maybe like the US firm gets private equity or gets bought itself, then he'll sell the remaining 40%, and during that time he can integrate the business. But I've known deals where the person selling the 40 ends up getting about 3 or 4 times as much of the 40 than they got for the original 60. So it can be very, very attractive type of deal.
Yeah, so just the synergies really align, and basically basically on your second exit, you just earn more than if
Yeah,
you were
you
to sell
can,
all at
because
once.
you're growing the business under the umbrella of someone who's got a lot more muscle, basically.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that previous interviews, how marketing agencies, although they are experts at marketing other firms, they also struggle marketing themselves.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what do you mean by that in more detail?
Yes, I mean, it's a strange one, but they're really expert. I mean, founders of agencies, management teams, it's a very busy environment. You have to be very passionate to run one of these agencies and work very hard. And therefore, sometimes your focus is on winning clients and servicing a client, and you don't think so much about branding and marketing your own agency. And often some of the business obviously comes through the founder, a lot of the founder through his network or his skills. So, but they don't really always market themselves so well. As I say, the focus is on servicing. So, but what you do need to do is create a funnel of business. So that's where marketing comes in. And so, when I look at a business for sale, when I take on a business for sale or a couple of years out, I'll look at it and I'll look at the quality of their website. I'll look at the quality of their marketing on things like LinkedIn and that sort of thing, and look, so they've got the best algorithms to, rather than actually go out and hunt business. Basically the word of today really is to attract business, and that's what you ideally want to do as an agency, or any business really. And that's the trend of all businesses, I think. And the trend in marketing is that you've got to become an attractor rather than a hunter, because the days of hunting are over, because people tend to look online and choose their agency or their service through looking online rather than being approached by a salesman.
Yeah. And just one more thing. If you could design the perfect M&A process from a seller's perspective, free of industry, politics, pressure, and timing constraints, what would it look like?
Well, we have that. We've already designed it.
Oh.
But that's why we're reasonably successful. We have a pretty high success rate with M&A. We sort of complete, it's got to be 80 or 90% of our deals. Generally, if you look over the 15 years we've been in business, we've completed most of our deals. Where we haven't is where there might be an issue with the company we're selling. They might lose a major client or something like that. But where it's a straight, nothing wrong with the company, then we'll pretty much always find a buyer for it. So we do quite well. But our focus, our process is obviously based on these elements, having chemistry meetings between the buyer and the seller, focusing on the cultural match, focusing on the outstanding business proposition. And that not only creates a successful sale, or it improves the chances of the sale happening. I mean, we do a huge amount of research to find the right buyers, but also the important thing is for any of these sales is that they are long lasting. You want these sales to be to last. You hear these stories, these horror stories about M&A deals crashing and burning after they've been bought. And most of ours, if you look at them over the years, they haven't. They've been quite successful businesses because we have those three boxes to tick: the chemistry, the culture, and the proposition before they start. Because that, they generally, once you've got those, they're generally successful.
And so, in terms of your process within your firm, so you win a client, is it you and a few directors, or is it you and an analyst below you? What's the structure hierarchy going on when you trying to
there's a team of about 6 of us here, and I head up the firm. So I do probably a lot of the sort of discussions on new business, on strategy. I do a little bit of consulting 2 or 3 years out with companies, giving them some advice, and I will negotiate the final deal. And then I've got a team that do the research, that are dedicated to researching out buyers, because that's so important. We've got an IT guy, We've got people who arrange the meetings with the clients and the buyers and follow up. And we've got a person who looks after new business, so she's focusing constantly on, following up with our prospects and those sorts of things. In this business, you have to be talking with potential buyers and sellers all of the time. So that's how it works, really. And sometimes my colleague goes to the buyer meetings, I go to the buyer meetings. So that's how we work. But it works pretty well.
And for the earnout process, when you talked about deals going bad, what's your general opinion on the earnout process where the seller stays in the business post acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, earnouts are going a little bit out of style now. You may have seen my post on LinkedIn where I said our earnouts go in the way of skinny jeans.
Yeah.
Oh,
you saw that.
The one with the
the girl, the model with the placard. Yeah. And the reason for that is earnouts. They're basically like incentive payments, but what they are legally. So what they are is saying, for example, if your profits go up, you might say, right, we'll pay you a 6 times multiple for your business. So you get on day one 6 times the current profits, and you might get 50% of that value.
Yeah.
And then for the second year, you'll get whatever the profits are then times 6. And then the third year, you'll get, if it's a 3-year earnout, you'll get the profits again by 6, obviously divided by the average. So it's 33% if it's a 3-year earnout of that amount. And the thing about that is that for the buyer, these earnouts are legally ring fenced, so they don't get they're not entitled to run. They don't actually own the business until the last payment is made. So that can be a problem because you can't integrate the business so quickly. The seller can always say, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have your finance department doing my accounts. I don't want to service your client that's really difficult. So that's the reason why earnouts are going out of fashion. So instead, people are buying a stake very often, and they might pass some shares on. So you might, buy 60% in cash, and then 40% is translated in shares or left in shares of the seller, and then you can integrate the business pretty well from day one, and subject to certain agreed rules between you, and then you go on from there.
Would you say the share consideration is substantially more than the cash consideration in the deals you're doing?
No, I mean, up front, most of the deal will be in cash. So if you did a 60-40 deal, the chances are that 60% would be paid in cash. And then the 40% that's trailing would be either your own shares or somebody else, or the shares of the buyer. We would actually recommend as a firm that probably no more than 20% should be in shares. It's mostly cash. Because it's always a risk taking someone else's equity. You know your own equity, but you don't know somebody else's, and you don't know how that's going to do. But when it goes well, then that equity can be worth a lot of money when it's sold, and that's why ultimately you may well get a lot more for the trailing 40% than you get from the earlier cash amounts.
When a company comes to you and they're like, David, look, I have a marketing company and I want to go to the market, and you conduct a strategic review, basically.
Yeah.
And you identify the bottlenecks. Sometimes does the company find its bottlenecks, repair its processes, and fix the company, basically, and not go to market and continue operating?
Yeah, absolutely. That's often, I wouldn't say it's often the case. That can be the case in certain circumstances. I mean, people come to me and say they'd like a review of their business, which is a bit like an MOT, really. You're looking at all aspects. You're looking at the staffing. You're looking at the finances, the numbers, the client relationships, all of those things that you're reviewing. And if at the end of the day, what you'll do is at the end of that commercial review, you'll provide a strategy for them. If they wanted to sell, you'll provide an evaluation, and you'll address what you call some of the the good things about the business, the premium factors that are going to be attractive to buyers, and also the discount factors that won't be so attractive to buyers, may put them off. So what you've got to do is minimize those discount factors and focus on the premiums. And some of those discount factors I've spoken about before might be the fact that they've not got a strong enough second tier team, or their finances are weak, or they're too reliant on one particular contract, or they're not focused enough as a business. Now, if you address all of those things, you're going to end up with a much better business, whether you sell it or not, because you're going. So that will be better for the founder for sure.
So for people like us who are just getting started in M&A and finance, especially in people-focused sectors, what are the top skills you look at that make sure someone is going to stand out in their career?
It's an interesting one, that is, and it's maybe I'm a bit too long in the tooth to answer that, because you guys are much younger than me, and trends change, things change.
Yeah.
But I haven't had a career in M&A. I mean, I started off as an accountant. I mean, I was always, as a kid, interested in business. So I always wanted a career in business, maybe the same as you guys. And that's that you're doing. And so, I spoke with my dad, and he said the best way to learn about business is become an accountant. They're the guys that hold the top positions in industry. And at the time, they did. So, and that's why I became an accountant. And you learn a huge amount as an accountant. There's no question about it. I moved an awful lot around different jobs and different countries. So I got some great business experience. So I haven't had the traditional M&A route. I haven't joined an M&A firm as an analyst and moved on. And I think having that wide business experience as running the firm is a real big advantage. And I'm personally not sure about the kind of the vertical route of starting as an analyst and working your way up to partner, because you're never going to see that big wide world out there. You're only going to be focusing on deals in a particular firm. So I would say to you guys, or still say to a youngster, go and get as much experience as you can, business experience. Just go out there and take different jobs and learn as much as you can, rather than by being stuck in that vertical sort of dead man's shoes. Not always dead man's shoes, but that vertical. But some people get on very well by doing that. It's difficult to judge, but that's how I did it, and I still feel in many ways that still works today.
That is some great insight.
Well, David, it's been a pleasure, honestly, and I'm sure that our viewers have gained a lot of insights and lessons about your business. So thank you for joining us. It's been really good.
No, it's a real pleasure to meet you guys. Thanks very much for reaching out. Great to meet you, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you, David.
Take care, David. Have a great day.
All the best to you.